So one of the things that you mentioned in the book, and there was like a theme of like quite a lot of things, is where there was numerous examples you cite where Chinese, whether it's like intelligence officials in China, or whether it's like one of the groups in the many countries that you kind of
Mhm.
describe in the different chapters, that they focus like they go really hard on what seems like really tiny and innocuous things, and like
Mhm.
people that would not mean anything, and and
Yeah.
and like that kind of rhymes with what you were saying about the protesters, like being like that all they do would be like a blank sign, and that was too much.
Mhm.
It's like, what do you think that there's is the national security like intelligence state so overarching that they have the resources to just go after individuals, or are we seeing the examples that are meant to like set an example essentially for
Yeah.
the others?
I think both for sure. And I try to explain like why this happens because for so long it's been happening for decades. Like here in Vancouver, Canada, definitely London, Australia. It started off with places around the world where Chinese immigrants uh, left China and settled in because historically, the Chinese leaders have had opposition from overseas Chinese. The last dynasty of China, the Qing dynasty, was overthrown by someone, Sun Yat-sen, and his forces. He studied in Hawaii. He visited and stayed with his older brother.
No
And
way. In Hawaii.
yeah, so, and then he gathered like resources, like money from overseas Chinese who were kind of fed up with kind of feudal imperial rule and, overthrew a dynasty. So definitely there's precedent to pay attention to what's going on around the world because they worry that people of Chinese descent, even if they've lived overseas for generations, might have a greater impact on what's happening domestically in China. People, and there's some truth to it. When the audio app Clubhouse
Mm-hmm.
wasn't banned in China, there were these rooms, chat rooms with, thousands of people, hundreds of people, including people from Taiwan, Hong Kong, you know, Americans of Chinese descent in these groups talking about really sensitive issues like what's happening in Xinjiang, what's happening in Hong Kong. And they were speaking and dialoguing directly with mainland Chinese citizens. And they were able to talk because they spoke Mandarin. A lot of people retained their ability to speak Chinese. And you can see changes like people in China who were skeptical because they've only been exposed to Chinese propaganda and state media about what's happening in Xinjiang to the Uyghurs. They were very like disbelieving at first, but after hours of conversation with overseas Chinese and experts who
Wow.
spoke Chinese from around the world, a lot of them, they were breaking down crying. Their opinions changed. And that's exactly what Beijing doesn't want to see happen. That's why Clubhouse is banned. That's why Facebook, Google products, Twitter, they're all banned. And there's, crackdowns on social media is so tight in China, and that leads to what has been happening for decades with trying to understand and track and monitor the activities of people, both overseas Chinese and China experts, like people of all nationalities and ethnicities who follow what's happening in China, trying to understand what these communities around the world are up to and trying to influence them to be more friendly to Beijing. And this, used to be, they used like economic pressure, like putting pressure on advertisers for Chinese language independent media around the world to pull their ads if they have any sort of business links to China, like putting pressure on that. So to try to control the conversations around the world. And my research has found that, you know, it's not clear how long this has been happening, but definitely in the last 5, 10 years, it seemed to ramped up where when those subtle economic pressures aren't working, where there's still these like things like solidarity marches for Hong Kong all over the world, that worries Chinese leaders. And I found that people have actually received physical visits from people identifying themselves as, linked to the Chinese embassies, or calls from Chinese police saying, don't do this, even if you're in Canada or the UK. Otherwise, something will happen to your family in China. Something will happen to your business. Like threatening these pretty serious things. Like imagine if you had any kind of like friends or family in China who could, arbitrarily be thrown in jail or, lose your homes because of your free speech around the world. This has become so common and it's really flown under the radar because it seems strange. Like, why would any country, no matter how, well resourced, spend so much time of actually calling random people around the world to threaten them, to figure out who their family members are in China, what their businesses are like, if they have any links. But it makes sense when you think about just understand how sensitive and almost paranoid the Chinese state is. It's as if they feel that their hold on power is very unstable. I was covering things like when the stock market seemed to be crashing in China. I was covering some labor protests, actually, labor movements where factory workers were trying
Oh
to
yeah,
agitate in
I've seen
China.
that.
So there is unrest all over China that we don't hear about, understand, and having that overseas concern and interest is sometimes it's just unacceptable. If people want to read an excerpt from my book, in the Toronto Star, my newspaper, there's an excerpt where I describe what happened to a Chinese international student studying in Canada. He had 2 Twitter followers,
Yeah,
and he was just like,
that one freaked me
experimenting
out.
with the platform because,
That really freaked me out, man. Two
yeah, it was his
followers
first
under a
time. Two
fake
followers.
name, right? It was under a fake.
No,
Was it?
yeah,
Who was under a fake name? Who had like? There was
yeah, fake
someone.
name.
Yeah, fake
He
name.
changed his gender to female.
Yeah,
He used a VPN even while in Canada because he was worried,
they
and then
still
he got
tracked him
a
down.
call first from his dad saying, "Son, what are you doing? The Chinese police are, knocking on our door." And then he got a call from Chinese police from his home city in China saying, "We know who you are. We know what you did. We tracked your IP address in Canada. Um, you know, take down those posts or else." And he actually never said anything. He only retweeted a few posts, including a video that was kind of lightly poking fun of, Xi Jinping. And he tried to report what happened to Canadian police authorities because he was actually studying law at a good university in Canada. He understood his rights and that this was unacceptable. But Canadian police basically laughed him off, saying like, "You have freedom of speech in Canada. This is not something that we can help with. You could do what you want," and did not even take down his report. So that's why my book, I say, is almost, as I did more research, it's almost as much about Western complicity and willful ignorance and just a lack of attention and concern as it is criticizing what Chinese authorities are doing, because I think they've only been able to be so widespread and do all these things and basically terrorize a lot of ordinary people around the world because Western governments just haven't prioritized this, haven't taken it seriously. Um, and people don't feel supported. So when people don't feel supported, it becomes worse because we have less people who understand what's happening, willing to speak up and be experts or, witness testimonies because they don't feel safe. So it's kind of like a cycle. And so each chapter of my book kind of describes what's happening and also describes what basically in every place I visited, the governments aren't doing or aren't aware of.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment for us in the comments below. Let me know what you thought and if you'd like to see more of this from the show. Thank you, and we'll see you again next time.